September 12th, 1944. Stolberg Corridor, Germany. General der Infanterie, Kurt Chill, read the map and did the math. Concrete, wire, pillboxes, enough to bleed a corps. Tanks would choke in the last 800 yards. That was doctrine. Then the Shermans came with pipe organs on their backs. 60 rockets per tank, 300 per platoon, 1,200 per minute. And the last 800 yards turned soft. The launcher began in a proving ground shop. In 1943 at Aberdeen, proving ground ordnance crews welded a two-tier cage of 4.5-inch tubes to an M4. The modest project became the T34 Calliope. The rack held 60 tubes, elevation slave to the 75mm trunnions within Pultstendig. Early faults were mechanical and straightforward. Electrical leads arced after about 200 firings, tubes shifted after 10-15 miles of rough travel, and the turret's depression limited near-field shots. The fixes were practical: rubber-sheathed wiring, a mantlet brace, and one field rule: fire the salvo, then jettison the rack. 2 pins out, 60-90 seconds, the Sherman reverted to a gun tank. According to Armored Force Headquarters records, August 1944, roughly 60 racks plus spares crossed the channel in the last week of August. The intended employment window was close. Best effect, 1,200 yards, usable to about 3,500. Training was compact and measurable. 6 hours classroom on fuses and dispersion, 2 hours dry mount drill, and 24 live rockets per crew for hands-on firing and reload practice. Crews learned a 3-count fire command on one radio net, a replacement for a lengthy artillery registration. The practical effect was numerical and immediate. One Sherman carried 60 rockets. A 5-tank section could fire 300 rockets in 12-18 seconds, 1625 rockets sec, across a 200-400 yard frontage. A company massed of 10-15 tanks could deliver 600-900 rounds in under 1 minute. 2-stepped salvos 30-60 seconds apart let a battalion put 1,200 warheads across an objective, then push at 3.5 Ilma Fisch while dust still hung. First U.S. Army timing tables in September showed crossings of 1,200 yards, falling from 22-25 minutes to roughly 12-20 minutes where terrain and weather held. German reports captured the surprise plainly. War diaries near Rotgen, September 14th, initially logged the barrage as distant rocket artillery at 3,000 yards. Prisoner interrogations in October corrected the estimate to inside 1,000 yards. A 12th Volksgrenadier lieutenant summarized the effect. They flood a sector before our mortars can shift. The shock was not that rockets existed, but that they arrived with armor at close range and in volumes the defenders could not match in the moment. Logistics made the idea practical, not exotic. A rack needed about 120-150 shop hours to fabricate. First-time mountings took 8-10 hours. Thereafter, 4-6. A 60-round tank reload weighed roughly 0.5-0.6 tons. 4 men could reload a tank in 15-20 minutes. A platoon reload, 300 rockets, therefore amounted to 2.5-3.5 tons. If a battalion fired 2 cycles in 24 hours, 1,200 rockets, quartermaster lifts added about 10-14 tons of ordnance, a small fraction of divisional daily movements that already ran 200-400 tons of shells and fuel. No new battery emplacement, no lengthy survey. 1 truck lift and a short radio call bought minutes on the battlefield. On the battlefields of late 1944, 3 rocket systems offered 3 different answers to the same question: how to saturate a target with fire. The U.S. T34 Calliope stacked 60 tubes of 4.5-inch rockets on one M4. The German Panzerwerfer 42 mounted 10 tubes of 15-centimeter rockets on a half-track. The foot-carried Nebelwerfer detachments operated 6-barrel carriages that had to be emplaced, wired, and masked. Range distinguished purpose. Calliope crews fired at 704,000 yards. Panzerwerfer typical arcs were 2,000-7,000 yards. Nebelwerfer batteries opened at 4,600 yards and pulled out before counter-battery. The numbers suggested a doctrine. Americans soaked the last 1,000 yards. Germans painted the far fields and displaced. Manufacture told another story. A Calliope rack was angle iron and simple weldments, roughly 120-150 shop hours to fabricate and assemble, 8-10 hours to mount, 4-6 to remount. The Panzerwerfer, by contrast, consumed a whole Sortidu Kate SF.4-1 hull, a complex 10-barrel cluster, and dozens of precision fittings, hundreds of skilled hours that Germany in late 1944 did not have to spare. By October, U.S. depots in France received rockets in lots of 9,600 every 10 days. A single armored division could expend 1,800 in a 24-hour breach, reload twice, and keep schedule. According to First U.S. Army Ordnance Records, October 1944, forward dumps along 7 Corps were holding 12,000 18,000 rounds within 20-30 miles of the line. While these rocket batteries shaped the battle from thousands of yards away, the deadliest fight was often decided in the final 50 yards by a far more personal weapon. The silent enemy on the approach march was not a howitzer at all, but the handheld hollow charge. The US M1A1 bazooka at 2.36 inches was reusable, crewed by 2 men, and best under 8,120 yards against vertical plate. The German Panzerschreck, 88 mm, hit harder at 100-180 yards, but needed a shield and discipline to manage backblast. The Panzerfaust, the real mass threat, was single-use, point-blank practical, 30-60 yards for the Faustpatron 30 and 60, issued by the Crate to Volksgrenadiers and Hitlerjugend. By late 1944, German factories had turned out millions. A platoon in the woods could field 20-30 tubes in minutes. Training was measured in hours. Aim low on moving tanks, fire from basements, let them come within 50 steps. The effect on American habits was immediate. Button up at 300 yards, keep infantry on the glacis, hose likely windows at 50-yard bounds. Keep them off the walls, a battalion commander told his companies near Würselen in November. Economics underwrote the risk calculus. A single Calliope-equipped Sherman represented 1 additional ton of consumables per breach cycle and 4 to 6 extra man-hours of maintenance per day, but it replaced 10 to 20 minutes of preparatory artillery at battery scale. If a division frontage needed 3 such cycles, 900 rockets, trucks hauled roughly 9 to 11 tons forward, a task that fit neatly into quartermaster lifts already moving 105 millimeter and gasoline. German logistics inverted the curve, fuel at 30 to 40% of requirement, rail nodes smashed, vehicle pools cannibalized. The Panzerwerfer's power lay in surprise and the emotional shock of a single 10-tube ripple. Its weakness was the 10 to 12 minutes of vulnerability between salvos. Winter clarified tolerances. Rockets that flew true at 60 degrees Fahrenheit drifted long at 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Fuses grew sluggish. Cables stiffened. U.S. crews compensated with 50-yard aim-low rules, double checks on ignition continuity, and a hard ceiling. No launches under 200 yards and high crosswind. German half-tracks bogged at the same rate as Sherman's, but the American launcher's low parts count meant a wrench and a pin usually restored function in 5 minutes. By late October, First Army scheduled Calliope concentrations at 0700 and 1600, anchoring infantry assaults that crossed 600 to 1,200 yards of cleared belt in 8 to 20 minutes. The Siegfried line did not break everywhere, not at once. It sagged locally where numbers piled up quickly. The German defense of the Siegfried line was built on a simple, brutal principle: make the enemy pay for every yard in blood. Their doctrine relied on interlocking fields of fire from concrete bunkers, supported by anti-tank guns and veteran infantry who knew every cellar and street corner. They expected a slow, grinding battle of attrition where their superior defensive positions would bleed the Americans white. They were not prepared for the American answer, which was not a bigger gun, but a completely different philosophy of urban assault. This new doctrine was not born in a command headquarters, but forged in the streets of towns like Stolberg and Würselen. It was a method that valued overwhelming tempo above all else. At its heart was the T34 Calliope, not as a standalone weapon, but as the door opener for a combined arms team that moved at a terrifying speed. While German defenders waited for the methodical artillery bombardments they were used to, the Americans compressed the entire assault cycle into mere minutes. An engagement near Haren on November 18, 1944, demonstrated the new American method. A German strongpoint, centered on 3 fortified houses covering a key intersection, had held up the advance for 6 hours. German doctrine dictated that they could hold for days. At 1400 hours, a section of 5 Calliope-equipped Shermans rolled into position 800 yards away. They didn't engage in a duel. They unleashed a single, coordinated salvo of 300 rockets. For the German defenders, it was as if the sky fell. The 15-second barrage was not precise, but it was total. It shattered roof tiles, blew out walls, suppressed machine gun nests, and filled the street with a blinding cloud of dust and smoke. The psychological shock was immense, but the real weapon was what came next. Before the last rocket had even impacted, American infantry were already moving. They didn't advance down the open street. They used the smoke as a screen to mousehole through the party walls of adjacent buildings, bypassing the German fields of fire entirely. Engineers ran forward, not to clear mines, but to drop Bangalore torpedoes at the base of the main bunker. While the Germans were still reeling from the rocket attack, the Americans were already inside their perimeter. This demonstrated a critical advantage in tempo. The entire American assault, from the first rocket to infantry clearing the first building, took less than 3 minutes. The German defensive cycle, which relied on calling for mortar support and shifting reserves, was designed to react over a span of 10 to 20 minutes. The Americans were operating so quickly that the German response was obsolete before it even began. Inside a cellar, Gefreiter Karl Benze experienced this doctrine firsthand. He was cradling a Panzerfaust, trained to kill the fearsome Sherman tank. He heard the rocket storm pass, counted the seconds, and peered through a slit in the foundation, waiting for the tank to appear. He never saw it. He only felt the floor tremble as it rolled past his position, already irrelevant. The wall behind him suddenly exploded inward as an American bar team blasted their way through from the next building. Benze was defeated not by a tank, but by a schedule he couldn't comprehend. This relentless pace was backed by an equally relentless logistical system. At a makeshift depot just outside Duren, Lieutenant Heleneus Ward of the 3rd Armored Division's maintenance section timed her crews with a stopwatch. They could swap a damaged Calliope launch tube in under 5 minutes. While German units were paralyzed for hours waiting for specialized repair teams, Ward's crews had a damaged tank back in the fight before the dust from its last engagement had fully settled. This ability to maintain momentum was the true unseen weapon. By January 1945, this method was no longer an improvisation. It was doctrine, formalized in typed sheets. The rules were simple: rockets suppressed, smoke blinded, and infantry exploited the chaos within seconds. A regimental commander's order from the battle for Würselen became legendary: keep them from inside 50 steps. The battle for the Siegfried line was not won by a superior tank, but by a superior system that turned concrete fortresses into timed objectives on a brutal, high-speed schedule. The breaching of the Siegfried line was not the end of a battle, but the end of a German military philosophy. The failure of its static defenses against a new form of mobile, overwhelming assault meant Germany could no longer rely on fortifications to trade space for time. The psychological shock and the sheer material cost of replacing shattered strongpoints accelerated the collapse on the Western Front. For the Americans, the success of the Calliope and the doctrine built around it validated their entire approach to warfare. The synthesis of industrial might, systems integration, and tactical tempo had proven superior to the German emphasis on defensive quality and static engineering. It was a lesson that would echo in U.S. military doctrine for decades. The Calliope cannot be understood without recognizing the industrial base that made it possible. Unlike the complex, purpose-built Panzerwerfer, which consumed an entire half-track chassis, the Calliope was merely an add-on kit. It embodied the American production philosophy of good enough and plenty of it. Fabricated in countless small workshops from simple angle iron and steel tubes, a Calliope rack required no specialized tooling or precious alloys. Every component was standardized and interchangeable. This meant a damaged launcher could be repaired in minutes on the battlefield with basic tools, as Lieutenant Heleneus Ward's crews demonstrated daily. German production, in its pursuit of technical perfection, created logistical nightmares. The Americans, in their pursuit of mass and speed, created a weapon that was logistically indestructible. Beyond the strategic analysis lay the human reality of this new warfare. For an American crew, a Calliope launch was a violent, multi-sensory event. The thunderous roar, the violent shudder of the tank, and the blinding backblast of smoke and concussion were terrifying. Misfires could turn the launcher into a death trap. The weapon's nickname, the Screaming Mimi's Big Brother, reflected this awesome but brutal power. For German soldiers like Gefreiter Karl Benze, the experience was one of impersonal industrial horror. They were trained to fight tanks, but found themselves being systematically dismantled by an invisible storm of steel and fire. There was nothing to shoot back at. The enemy was a schedule, a rhythm of destruction that arrived every few minutes. The civilians caught in the path of this storm experienced both terror and hope. The mayor of a liberated Belgian town near the Roer River later described it to reporters. First, there was a sound we had never heard, like a great pipe organ playing a chord of thunder. The explosions walked up the street, house by house. We hid in our cellars, praying. But when the noise stopped and we saw the American soldiers, we knew the sound we had heard was the sound of freedom. The destruction was immense, but for civilians who had endured 4 years of occupation, it was the cost of liberation. German prisoners captured in the Aachen sector provided invaluable intelligence. Interrogations, conducted under Geneva Convention protocols, revealed a deep sense of shock and helplessness. They described the Calliope as an unfair weapon that didn't allow them to fight. They consistently reported that their defensive plans, which relied on specific fields of fire and interlocking machine gun positions, were rendered useless in seconds. A post-war analysis by the Bundeswehr Historical Section concluded that the American rocket-breaching method represented a tactical failure for German defensive doctrine, noting that their static defenses lacked the flexibility to counter an enemy who used massed firepower to create his own terrain. Over the decades, the T34 Calliope has been largely overshadowed by more famous weapons. Yet its historical importance is immense. The Calliope, often seen as a crude improvisation, proved at the Siegfried line that wars are won by weapon systems, not by individual weapons. The formidable German bunker, for all its concrete and engineering, failed because it was just a fortification. The Calliope succeeded because it was the leading edge of an integrated American team that included fast-moving infantry, efficient engineers, and a logistical network that delivered seemingly unlimited ammunition. The battle for the German frontier demonstrated a lesson that remains timeless. Military effectiveness comes from the synthesis of doctrine, training, industry, and leadership. No single element, no matter how strong, can overcome a systemic advantage in all other areas.